You're starting YouTube, right, Kevin? You can start early.
Yeah, it's all up. You're good.
All right, just taking a second for it to push its way through. I have to refresh. Yes. All right. All right, folks. Hello. Welcome to second to the last interview for our Animate 2021, which is really a chance for you to get to meet our future mentors and for us all to kind of share the gospel of animation and learn a couple of different things. I do have a couple of things I need to remind you of. Number one, if you want to be part of Crit Friday, which is tomorrow, you need to upload that work, and that has to happen really soon because the slots are filling up. Like we actually have enough now, but I can squeeze people in if you kind of push it through. So I already have Fernando, Lucas, Yuta, Jan is in there, Reagan's in there, Prashant's in there, Tal, Karen, Alex, Alexandria, Naju, Nicholas, Andreas, Karine, and some more people are all in there with animations all set up. So these could be just simple shots that you're doing. It could be a lot of different things. But make sure that you guys are getting those things posted. In fact, if you don't mind, Kevin, I think I want to show one. Can I show my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. I have to be careful here. I put something on the, turn the audio off. Okay. Share screen. Screen one. No, screen three. You guys are seeing the animation here. So this is from Fernando. Excited. You send us the whole demo reel. You guys can see this, right?
Yep.
Cool. Thanks, Lucas. And so if you send us something like this, folks, this is what we're going to be sitting down and reviewing and looking at. So now I got to figure out how I stop sharing my screen. There we go. Okay. All right. You're back to the normal presentation. Kevin?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. All right. Let me pull that out. And okay, so today I have the pleasure of introducing you guys to the individual on my, I'm dyslexic and the screens are switched. So as I point right, it's actually going to point left. So he's on one of these sides of me. Lucas, thank you so much for being here, my friend. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so why don't we start out and just tell us like a little bit about yourself, what you do right now. I think you just scored a new job, yeah?
Yeah. So I've been at Rocksteady for the last 2 years working in games. Before that, I was at Naughty Dog. So in the last 3 years, I've been working in games. And then I'm transitioning into a new job as a senior animator at Frame Store next month.
Okay, awesome.
Mhm.
What is a senior animator? Because we got senior, we got lead, we got like what does it mean, right?
I think it probably depends on who you ask, and the companies have their own criteria, and that's probably
Right.
once you get into a job, it's nice to know that because you're always wanting to know what's my next level. And typically they'll give you like a bullet point of kind of soft skills, hard skills. And the way I would look at it is basically you're a self-motivated problem solver. So you're not always having to go seek help, and you're trying to, future solve things that you see coming down the pipe, as kind of how I think about it. Because when you're starting out, you may not have that foresight and the experience to be able to deal with those types of all kinds of problems that may or may not come up, and also how to communicate those if you do need help, from just having that experience to think, oh, I've seen this before, this is how we dealt with it here or there. And so I think it's just it's an accrual of that experience and applying it correctly, in my opinion.
Awesome. So why don't we start and kind of go through a little bit of the intellectual history, just get like what got you into animation. I want to talk a little bit about your career. And then you're also an educator. So I would love to really get as much as I can about like what you think beginners, the mistakes they're making, what they're doing well, some guidelines, things of that nature. But most people I talk to that get to the level, that you're at, they usually start with something. There's like, an event horizon, that starts the
Right.
whole thing. Is there one for you?
Yeah. So I actually had a degree in forestry. So I went to a 4-year college and got a Bachelor of Science in Forestry,
Hmm.
and was working at a university and was kind of bored in that day job and started to make, always made videos. I was a rock climber and then I got into hang gliding. So I was always making videos about these activities because I was super passionate about them and that was the only way I could really share it with people who couldn't do it because they're kind of adventure sports.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way I could really share it with people, my enthusiasm for it, was to make videos about it. And I actually ended up winning back in the day when, 2009, 2010, I actually won a bunch of YouTube contests like through Excedrin, Hewlett Packard, Lipton Iced Tea. I ended up winning more money through those YouTube contests than my day job back in the day because I was kind of in a niche area of like hang gliding adventure. This is like before wingsuit base jumping was a thing. And so hang gliding was pretty novel and it still kind of is. But so I was like, oh, maybe I should start doing this because the videos are getting traction. And as I started to do more videos, I started to hit all these boundaries with live action where you need insurance, you need to schedule actors and actresses, have casting and get permits for places. You have to have the equipment, which is always changing, get insurance for that. You have to have like a team of people, and it just starts to get snowball and get really kind of out of hand. And coming from my own kind of bootstrap, like I'm just doing my thing, climbing or flying. And as like, this isn't why I got into it, was to start to manage all these moving pieces. And what appealed to me about animation was I could sit down and I could make all of those things. If I need an actor or actress, I could make them, I could animate them. So it gave me a lot of independence just from a creator standpoint. So that kind of sparked my interest that I want to go in this direction. But in reality, I actually wanted to be a compositor because I was kind of coming from the film side. So After Effects, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But then when I actually got to the school I went to for a 1-year program, I was like, oh, animation is like this whole craft and you kind of really need a mentor. And that appealed to me as far as like, it's not so much about which button to press. It's about how, like why or how you're doing it, as opposed to like some technical thing. And like learning a software is all you need to know. The craft aspect is what caught my eye. So then that's how I got into animation.
That's like out of left field.
Yeah.
That's
It's
like
not a usual path.
Yeah. And when you started that forestry degree, did you was it different? Was the job different than you thought it was going to actually be?
Yeah, I got the degree because I wanted hard skills. I wanted to like graduate. I went to a liberal arts school, so I did philosophy, all kinds of stuff. But at the end of the day, I wanted to have hard skills that I could, bare minimum, I know I can do this XYZ. And so that's why I went for that. And they were 4-hour labs, and you would just go out in the woods, and the professor would just point at stuff and tell you cool things. And so, but there was also a wide range of like, you could do private land management, you could go do research, you could do all these things. So I got into GIS, which actually, oddly enough, has some overlap into what we're doing, especially nowadays with like LiDAR. And, we were using satellite imagery to figure out forest composition based on, infrared, how different foliage like reflects light and that kind of a thing. You could figure out evergreens versus hardwoods. And so it was just an interesting kind of application of like, now looking back, I'm like, oh, okay, like sample space of like, averaging pixels like that. We did that back in GIS, geographic information system days. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah. Is there, do you still climb?
Not as much. Once I got into flying hang gliders, I realized that's what I think I was always trying to do with climbing. I wanted to get higher. And then when you're flying, you're like, oh, I can't get higher than this. This is as good as it gets.
Yeah.
So,
what kind of climbing did you do? Did you do the multi-pitch?
yeah, I did everything. So I did bouldering, sport climbing, trad climbing, and I actually got into mountaineering so I've climbed 3 of the 7 summits Actually, when I was 16, I climbed Denali, which is the tallest mountain in North America. And then I soloed Aconcagua, which is the tallest mountain in South America. And then most people, I think, don't realize the tallest mountain in Europe is considered to be Mount Elbrus, which is actually in Russia. So I actually went to Russia with one other guy and climbed that. So, yeah.
Russia's part of Europe. Don't tell them that.
I know, right? I'm
not going to go over well.
The continent, how they figure out the continent, because the 7 summits are the 7 continents. And there's some debate around the oceanic continent, which summit is considered the tallest for that one. So
yes, yeah, I love how Europe, Russia, Asia, like it's all one landmass, but they're different continents. Like, you know who wrote that history, and it wasn't these guys. It's these guys.
Right.
So, awesome. All right, so let's talk a compositor, video editing. Interesting. Yeah.
I kind of wanted to be the one-man studio and do it all, and that can be a double-edged sword.
Yeah. So, but animation, like, that's not a small feat. Like, there's a lot of stuff you have to learn, and there's kind of an apprenticeship period, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, and that was part of the appeal for me, is like that was part of the barrier to entry. Really, is you kind of can't you could do it on your own, but it's going to take a long time, and it's going to be very difficult and painful. And you kind of really need that Padawan, sensei master relationship with someone or multiple people to kind of help guide you. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was one of the first things that you did when you started? Did you start with bouncing ball, or?
Yeah, we actually started with 2D, so that it kind of divorced the barrier of the software. And so since a lot of the concepts are agnostic to software, that's where we started before we even opened up Maya, which is what we learned. And I've used in every job I've ever had. So yeah, we went along and kind of went through the principles with the bouncing ball, overlapping action with, like, now draw a little piece of hair on the ball and do those same exercises. Yeah.
Yeah. So no Blender, huh?
No Blender, especially back then. This was like 10 or 11 years ago. I think the animation side is, I've tried. I mean, it's impressive, especially modeling. I mean, you would know more about that than me, but the animation tools that I've looked at, it's a bit of a, I'm obviously biased coming from Maya, but it's still a bit of a hurdle for someone like me to just quickly adopt it. But it's getting there, I think.
That graph editor in Maya, I mean, I think that, like, solidified their hold on the industry for another decade.
Yeah, and then bringing in the motion builder tools like HIK, and now they have Time Editor, which they used to have. They still have Tracks Editor, but the Time Editor to deal with mocap has been huge.
So where, like, from your perspective now, I was talking to Kyle earlier, and I run a school here, and I'm thinking about how we train people, and I'm looking at other schools and what people are doing. And, I so rarely see mocap or the technical angles of animation actually talked about. How important is knowledge of those to you?
Yeah, huge. And I learned that on the job. Like, that was something that wasn't taught at my school. And I think the biggest barrier mentally is for someone to deal with really dense data, because when you're, gradually taking those steps in animation, there's a sense of organization that you want to try to keep as you progress through the stages of blocking to polish, and things start to kind of, get a lot more dense as you go through that stage. And it feels a lot more complicated because it becomes a big, complicated web of all these keys. And so when you start from square one with that, and you're not coming from a blocking stage, you can gradually take it through that process. And instead, that's from square one what you're dealing with. I think it can be overwhelming for someone who's not had some, like, basic instruction about that.
Yeah. So how do we deal with that? Kyle was talking about layers and, all of this good stuff, but I know that animation layers in and of itself is like it's kind of a little bit more of an advanced concept, right?
Yeah. And I think the way that I like to think about it is, at the end of the day, no one's going to see they're not going to see your graph editor. They're not going to see the layers you used. And especially for film or TV, something that's not like a game where you need it to be good from all angles. All that matters is that 2D image. And if it's not VR, et cetera, et cetera. But so, if all the concepts are there from the beginning, like silhouette and, spacing and all that stuff applies. And if you can, at the end of the day, just use those, have a base knowledge of those tools, like those animation layers, which would be my first suggestion. Same thing, because it's like I can keep all this kind of data and then non-destructively add to it. If I mess up, I can just get rid of it or dial it down with the weight slider. And then that gives you a chance to play and make mistakes and not totally messed up. Would be, I think, the entry point for a lot of people.
Okay, so let's start talking a little. I want to talk about the job and some of the things that aspiring people do. So, you've trained quite a few students. I think you have a class, and it's got a Udemy ranking.
It's been the bestseller on Udemy for 3 or 4 years, and I think there's 24,000 people have taken it now. So I've fielded over 2,500 questions now by myself.
Wow.
So I've learned where people trip up, like, and need the most help. And it's been very educational for me to make something like that and get that much feedback and have that much data from that standpoint.
Well, let's start with somebody who's starting out. A lot of people, when they're starting something new, they're always asking, like, is this for me? Can I do this? And I've seen people come from all backgrounds. But somebody might look at animation and say, like, maybe I draw or maybe I don't draw. Like, maybe I draw, but I don't use a computer. Maybe I don't draw and I do use a computer. So what are some of the characteristics, like, of successful students from your perspective? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think part of it has to do with grit to a degree and being able to deal with things not working as expected on every level, and being able to get through that friction, even just a little bit. And when you have someone to kind of help you, if you get through that friction and there's still a problem, and then have someone that can help you, but you're going to learn so much quicker. Because I mean, that's how it is, even if you're in person, right? Like you can only lead a horse to water. You can't make him drink, kind of a thing. Like, at some point, the person has to do the work themselves anyways. And so if you can at least have that kind of growth mindset where, like, all right, I'm like XYZ person is like, I'm a B+ student, right? Like, I'm not some savant of any kind. Like, I'm average. And I was able to figure this stuff out. But I think the difference with me, especially coming from an athletic background, like having a bit more grit, I can just push through and have a bit more work ethic, where that can help me get through that initial friction that I think people maybe want to give up a little too early. And I think that, it doesn't help them in the long run. But that's my thing. Because I think too, what I've seen when people ask questions, I've noticed when a student asks a question is that you can tell how they're framing it in their mind. So they'll ask, and this is something I've now made an extra lesson about in mind to help preempt this, but they'll ask a question and they'll frame it in the sense of, I did everything correctly and this is still not working. And so if I could, I try to help them put the shoe on the other foot and think, all right, if you were me and someone came to you and said, I did everything right, what's wrong? And it's like, well, it's difficult for me to answer that because you already think you did everything right. So from square one, it's going to be difficult to help you see what 9 times out of 10 that I found they did do wrong. So we're already at a point of friction there. So I think that's indicates that kind of lack of growth mindset, where it's like, hey, let me question this a little bit and think, did I do everything right? I could have totally messed something up. I have no idea. And just be open to that. And if you're open to it, then you can troubleshoot yourself a lot easier before it even gets to that stage to ask for help. And then when you do, still be open to that possibility, because then you can look for things that you wouldn't otherwise. You're like, nope, I did everything right. I'm not looking into it. It's like, that's going to be hard on yourself, not just for the person trying to help you, but for yourself. That's just going to be challenging in the long run.
Yeah, totally. I was just talking to a crew about this today in the character arts bootcamp, and we call it here coachability. Like, you have to be coachable. Otherwise, I just put it back to the students, and I'm like, if you're not going to trust what I say, if you're, then you have to question why you spent the money. It's
why did you choose to get I mean, why are you here? And if you already know it or whatever.
And so coachability, I think, is a really kind of important element for us to kind of keep our head around this. And so oh, there was one question I wanted to have that's going to come back. What are some of the mistakes that you see, beginning animators make? Primarily in their, let's say, there's two aspects. Because, for example, I had a student today that was at a plateau, and they'd showed me, because we have an exercise where you sculpt 6 faces, and they're like, I don't know how he did it, but all 6 of those faces were like the exact same face, and there was the exact same problem. And so he told me, he was tense the entire time he was doing it. And I was like, well, that's why they all look like they're in pain, And so what are some of the mistakes that beginning animators make in terms of their process, in terms of how they work? Because I don't think we talk enough about the fact that, the software, but you're bringing something to this.
Yeah, I think it's a beginning thing and something I deal with and have just acknowledged now long enough that I know how to approach it. And it's being able to step away from the work to have fresh eyes, because when you're in it, you think you're kind of in the flow or on a roll. And maybe, I think of it's like focus just kind of starts to tail off. And just because you're staring at something doesn't mean you're focusing on it. And so you could be watching the same thing over and over, and you're not really cluing in to what you're seeing. And so I think stepping away, I mean, there's the Pomodoro technique, the 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off kind of a thing. Yeah. I think is helpful to frame it in some ways. And there's all these kind of different productivity kind of hacks like that to do. But I think that's in general, just coming at something with fresh eyes. Because when you can't get like super regular feedback, you're going to have to be your own feedback loop. And you can't do that if you're just like hitting play and then just watching something play on loop for like 100 times. You just get super accustomed to it. And then you've just lost all kind of objectivity on it. And, in the modeling thing, I think is an interesting, I mean, we deal with it too with like silhouettes and tumbling around the pose or whatever. It's like, we literally get to look at things from different perspectives working in 3D. And I think that philosophy, you can just stretch that out kind of metaphorically and let me think, all right, let me just look at this one thing and look at it from all these different ways. All right, now let me break it down. You start to kind of like visually isolate different things. And because, when animation, full character body animation, it's like, it can be so overwhelming and you're just like seeing all this moving at once. You have to like visually isolate things either through like little tricks of, hiding stuff in the software, or I'll even just like put up a piece of paper on the screen and just be like, all right, block that out. I don't want to see the head or the face. I just need to look at the shoulder or whatever it is. So I think, forcing yourself to step away and then use techniques like that help be your own good feedback loop.
That's great, because you have to interrupt the pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's because in my painting, I'll do the same thing because I work life size. So it's, it's hard to get away from that. And so I remember like I'd put like plants in the way as I walk by. So you see like snippets of it,
Right,
you don't see the whole thing at once. So that's a great idea, just as simple as cover this.
Yeah. And in painting, I guess I'm not a painter, but I mean, it's a common technique to flip the canvas, right? To see it literally like from a different, same idea.
Okay. So,
and to that, I'll actually watch stuff in reverse sometimes.
What?
Yeah. To see, if it's a bouncing ball or whatever, it's like, it should feel like it's in reverse, right? If it is going in reverse. So there's little tricks like that too, that you can employ to be like, does this feel like it's going backwards?
I love it. So do you believe in talent? I love to know people's perspective on this, but do you believe in it?
I mean, 0.2%. I ran in college, and so I'm a big Steve Prefontaine fan. I grew up with those movies and like idolizing him as a runner, and his whole mantra was like, talent is a myth. And it's all about hard work. And like coming from like, so running in school, I was diagnosed with sports-induced asthma, and I would get these random asthma attacks. And I had a bit of a handicap. And so my mentality was, whatever I've been given, I just know no one's going to outwork me. There'll be no like question whether I worked hard enough. That will not be on the table. So when I took that mentality in animation, and that's kind of, I think what's helped make me be successful is that I just know no one's going to outwork me. I might not have the best skill or talent, but when it comes down to it, I won't look back and be like, oh, I could have worked harder. That's never been part of my DNA.
Yeah, but the other side of that is, can you work hard enough to be Usain Bolt, right?
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, that's where it's the point. I think you look who gets the gold medal. It's, well, Usain Bolt is maybe a bit different, but it's like, gold medal is here and silver is here, right? And it was a 400-meter race. So like relative to the distance they ran, if this is gold and this is silver or bronze or, fifth place even sometimes, like it is that point whatever percent. All right. Like it's like relative to the distance, it's, I could run with Usain Bolt. I would just be, 3 seconds behind him or something,
right.
In 100 maybe, which is not a hard distance, but
that's a really great way, because I think we treat, like, if you look at the Olympics, it's largely treated as a zero-sum game. It's like the winner's the winner.
Right.
And then you look at it and you're like, dude, that was like, you look at swimming, it's like 0.01 seconds. Like, really? I mean, is that just like
and
what
it's on
ate?
the day? It's like, it's not an average over time. It's like that moment. Like, exactly. Did you eat something right? Did you stretch a little extra? Like, there's so many factors. And then to be like, it's all talent is a bit harder. I mean, obviously you have like Michael Phelps or someone who has a very consistent, that's very clearly, they've done all that work. But like, that's where I find it difficult, where someone says like, I'm not good at drawing. And my immediate reaction is like, you just haven't done it long enough. Like, and I've talked to people who are, art directors or whatever, and they have the same kind of thing. It almost is like insulting, like it discounts all the hard work all these other people have done to get to that point, like, and one of the art directors I'm thinking of wanted to share all of his sketchbooks from when they weren't good, and he didn't want to share them, and just to show like, look, this is where I started. And I think that's why those posts like that, when people do that, like before and after, this is where I started, this is where I am, are so popular, because it kind of demystifies the myth of talent, which is like, yeah, it's that fraction. If you don't apply hard work to that bit of talent, then what's the point of having the talent?
Yeah, I get that. I think I was reading an interview with Michael Phelps, and he's talking about how he knew it was time to retire when he was okay with second place, right? So like when he was like, okay, I'll be fine with this. And so, it brings to mind, I mean, one, the work ethic, and how, you can talk talent, but it would be nothing if he didn't have that mindset.
Yeah.
So,
100%.
but then it becomes, for me, it becomes difficult. Like, I get mindset in athletics, and there's a zero-sum game, so it's very linear, very logic. Somebody loses, somebody wins. But when we go into the creative world, how does this mindset translate? Because you're not necessarily winning. Like, are you beating another animator? Like, that's not really team spirit.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of my mentality coming from athletics was the mistake part of that, was thinking that there is some gold medal to achieve when there isn't. Like, you're working in a team, and there's the Oscars, there's the Annies, but that's very subjective, right? And so I think having that mentality is detrimental to having a growth mindset in general, because it's such an outward looking thing that you're trying to look for validation outwardly, instead of thinking, what can I improve for myself? Because I'm running a race of one person, right? It's me, right, in this game. So I can only improve myself. I can't, I'm wasting time and energy looking outwardly like that. But that's where I think the flip side of that coin is for me, coming from that background.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And something like that came up earlier in a conversation where we were trying to talk about a little bit of this question of talent, like whether or not this is the career for us. And the animator brought up, like, he didn't get his dream job right out of school, right? He still hasn't got necessarily that dream job that he wanted, even though he's at like one of the top studios. And it's really all about the process and learning to love what you do, as opposed to getting that thing that you put on the shelf that you say that is an achievement, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's the appeal of animation to me, because I know I will never get first place ever. And what fun would that be if you always won first place anyways? That'd be boring. Like,
Yeah.
and that's why you see those people kind of like be bored with it. Like Usain Bolt or Michael Phelps, they're just kind of like, all right, I'm kind of done. Or someone that goes to the moon and comes back and they're like, all right, I'm bored now. Like in animation, to me, they're like, I'll never get bored because I can't ever achieve that, I think. So there's always something to improve.
They retire,
Yeah.
but animators, like, who retires as an animator? They're still working.
Yeah, and just visually, you could maybe retire from the mandatory work, but like when you watch something, you'll never not view something through that lens anymore. I think it's hard for me not to.
So one of the things I like to try to understand about animation, and I think we've talked about it before, but in terms of somebody coming into this and saying, hey, I want to do this. Okay, I get that it's a journey and I got to have a growth mindset as I approach this. Then the next series of questions that come to mind are like, well, okay, so what are the hurdles? Like, how do I organize this so that I get through there as quickly as possible and I'm not necessarily going left, right, backwards, forward? How do I know I'm making progress? And so to put that into something that's a little bit more cohesive, we could probably start with like, what do you think are some of the essential elements of really good animation, and not like, by the Disney standard per se, but like just from somebody who's looking to apply for work that makes them a job candidate?
100%. Yeah. I think the differentiation that isn't taught as much and what catches people off guard when they're in this journey is that to kind of even get your foot in the door, you need the physics down. You need to understand weight and timing and things that are just exist and are visually accurate. And then the next level that is really going to get you the job is showing your creative thought process. And that's what I think what trips people up in the development through animation, because at the early stages, you're given the bouncing ball. Like everyone knows the bouncing ball, right? You're given the next one. All those are kind of given like assignments and scenarios in most kind of curriculums. And then you get to the point where it's like, all right, now come up with an idea that maybe has a few constraints, but is, entertaining. And then it's like, oh, I haven't really had to thought about entertainment much. And I've only had to think about physics and accuracy. And when in reality, I mean, I was talking to one of the animation supervisors with Pixar, and he was like, you need to think about it like you're joining a theater troupe, right? You're like an actor, like you're coming with ideas. Like anyone can really learn the polish, the technicalities of like, it's kind of like a time thing, like how long it'll take you to get to that stage. But really the next level thing is, how can I creatively apply these things in an entertaining way? And I think that catches students off guard early when they are first confronted with, this needs to be entertaining now, not just like physically accurate.
So weight and physics, but isn't that like boring as hell?
It's how you apply them. I mean, it's to me, it's super fascinating. I like nerd out on that stuff. Like thumbing through frame by frame videos. I mean, I was just one of my favorite things on Twitter is to find, you'll find these memes or like crazy things that happen in sports or whatever. And then you're just like, oh my God, it's fascinating because of the motion, because of the physics. And so I find that stuff super interesting. Like break it down. Like why did this go viral? Why did this, this guy recently just slid in home and had the one I'm thinking of in this baseball game. And he had this like really sick, like spin at the end. And he like stood up very, very elegantly, super smooth. And it was like, man, if you animated that way, people would be like, that's wrong. But it goes viral and it's like, oh, I wonder how you could animate that and make it look right and interpret that in animation. And it's endless, right? And I'd never seen someone do that. And I've been working in 11 years. And so it's like every day you see stuff, just being a human and observing motion in life. It's fascinating. So to me, it's not boring.
I remember when I brought Dan on board, I was like, there was a lot of conversations about, can we skip the ball? Can we just go straight to walk cycle? And Dan was not having it. He was like, nope, got to do it.
Yeah, I mean, because it's like you're just kind of shooting yourself in the foot. It's like adding complexity. I mean, I think about it in terms of like animate quadruped. I mean, I've even thought about not even going to a walk, doing a single leg. Like,
Mm,
what's the point in doing two if you can't get one right, you know? And then going
mm,
to a quadruped, why are we trying to animate 4 legs if we can't even get 1 or 2 right?
right.
So I think there could be even more division there. If for students who need that, maybe there's some that don't need that, but I think breaking it down, because it can get just so overwhelming when there's just so much motion and things happening and trying to match mirror poses. And it's like, well, you didn't get the first one right. Why should we mirror it to make that loop? So yeah, that's,
Dan has brought that conversation up, and I was like, no, come
yeah.
on, please. Like,
Yeah. And but because it's not like a sexy thing to do and learn. And I think that's the reality, the stark reality for some students coming in, because they see so much. The forward facing stuff is like super polished, viral tweets of someone like work in progress, and really they spent like 6 months working on a thing.
Right.
And or they watch the latest movie of whatever, and then they're having to start from like wax on, wax off, Mr. Miyagi style stuff. And it's like, oh, it's a classic, go watch Karate Kid. Like that happens in that movie.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That is tough.
Yeah.
All right. So the sexy part is like, it's a hard thing to get your head around as a beginner, because, we're in this to do something. And so now, you're making me do a bouncing ball. And so now you have to have that apprenticeship.
Yeah.
But this is actually one of the things I thought was kind of interesting about your approach is, you liked that apprenticeship. You liked that idea that you have to focus on something.
It's like forbidden knowledge. It's like the dark arts, man,
Yeah, I get that, and so that's an important part of somebody being a successful animator, I imagine.
100%.
Okay. So how does this start to translate into somebody's portfolio? Like, what do you like to see in portfolios that help, show that this is somebody who's, number one, serious, number two, a job candidate?
I think it's taking like a, back to the kind of entertainment. It's like square one, like you have to hit like the mechanics and everything accurate.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an entertaining idea, but you're missing the mechanics, people don't want to have to train you on the job to that degree. They want you to have the mechanics down. And the plus is the entertainment value, where it's like, okay, we can give a little more free reign. Like I've really enjoyed, in my current role, is basically getting a script, and I take it from beginning to end through directing the motion capture, doing my own motion capture, polishing the motion capture, adding to it, changing it, doing the camera animation, pulling focal length, editing it. So every shot. So, that's not something I think you would give a junior role. So being able to show that kind of a thing in a reel would be impressive, not just the shots itself, but how it fits in a sequence. And I don't think I think one things that the beginners do is they bite off way more than they can chew, and ideas just spiral. So they'll do, oh, I want A, B, C to happen. And then once they get in, they're like, oh, I need 10 seconds for this. I need 10 seconds for that. I need maybe 20 seconds for that. So then you're like, man, that's like 40, that's a whole reel. It's just that one shot. What are you doing? And then if your skills aren't up to level, you just wasted all that time doing one 40-second thing that has the same mistake through all 40 seconds. Whereas if, you did a lot shorter exercises, you could kind of pull each one out and tweak, oh, maybe this one had this problem and this one had a different kind. And, you can kind of correct things more, as opposed if your whole reel is predicated on this one shot that kind of got out of hand just because your enthusiasm led you down this path. And I think that's what people who don't have a mentor to kind of guide them, like, hey, we need to rein this in. The scope of this is way too much. They kind of can shoot themselves in the foot.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So what are people missing about animation? And so one of the examples I can give you is with let's say character artists. You want to be a character artist. So somebody wants to be a character artist. They're looking at, Naughty Dog or some of these other places, and they want to sculpt characters. They want to do all this stuff. And then their first job maybe is, depending on where they get it, is outsource manager for, BioWare, let's say, for example. Right. And they're actually not sculpting.
Right.
faces, bodies, clothing, anything. They're just basically taking stuff that's come from an outsourced studio, and now they have to manage this. So what are people missing about this animation career and some of the things that are going to happen as they go?
Yeah, I think there's parallels to that example specifically, especially with games, because there's so much debugging and implementing in games that I don't think is like, if you see a pie chart, it's like a lot of that. It's more that than animation. Sometimes depending on what stage of the project you're at and what your role is, but that it's part of that understanding what you're getting yourself into there, but also kind of going back when you mentioned the dream job earlier, when you're talking about that other student, and I had this kind of false sense, like I only wanted to work at Pixar. I never wanted to work in games was my thing. I kind of turned my nose up at games for some snooty reason. And now I kind of kick myself because games is such an amazing opportunity to work in. And for whatever reason, I just had like, Pixar, whatever. Even if, let's say I got that, I'd be animating the guy in the background who's like blurred out. even if I got my dream job, I wouldn't be getting the hero shots, right? So or I could go work maybe at a smaller place and get maybe some of those hero shots, and my reel would progress maybe even further, quicker. But so, anyways, that's a bit of a tangent. But so I think what they're missing is keeping a broad mindset in that sense of like, all the opportunities available, whether it's VR, games. For me, I should have been looking at games a lot earlier. Previs, a place like the Third Floor or something like that. That there's so many opportunities, because like when I got hired at ILM, that was a huge part of the job, because you got to think about these projects there. Things happen all the time, right? Like notes, feedback, schedules change, especially with COVID, like maybe shooting got pushed back. So now we hired you. And so we got to give you something to do, but you don't know how, you've never done layout or previs. That's going to be a problem. So I think it's being comfortable and enthusiastic about those other things and not being kind of snooty. Like I wasn't this outwardly in any interview. I was grateful to get any interview early on, but in my mind, I was like, shucks, I want to get, this job or that job. In reality, I should have had a lot more enthusiasm for and pushing, like, hey, I could do this, I could do previs, I could maybe even help rig some things to help previs if the riggers are busy doing this other project. I can and which has helped me. Like I put my face on Brad Pitt in Ad Astra. I did the previs for that show for some of it. And we didn't have a rig, and so I literally was at my desk and took iPhone pictures of my own face and then projected it on the model just so we'd have some texture. And that was Brad Pitt for the previs for that movie.
You're his stand-in.
I was Brad Pitt's stand-in.
So nice to meet you. Yes.
Right. But it's like stuff like that on the fly. You're like, ooh, this is going to come in handy. I know how to do this and this, and being nimble and enthusiastic for it, and not begrudgingly being like, this isn't in my job description. I am not. It's like being a team player, I'm not trying to get gold for me. I'm trying to get gold for the team. So what points can I score for the team, not for myself? And that's always kind of led me in the right direction, like mindset wise, and in interviews, how I approach a job is like, I'm here for the project. I'm not here for anything else. And so if the project dictates I do whatever camera work and I don't touch the crazy cool hero shots, that's fine. Because I've directed short films for Lego. And actually one of them is at like 72 million views right now. It's just crazy. In like a year or two, it got a ton of views, but I did that whole thing by myself, and having to go through that process by myself. It doesn't matter if I want to do the hero shot or I don't want to do the hero shot. It all has to get done. And that's the mindset I bring into any job, is that enthusiasm for getting that stuff done. And it's super appealing, I think, to supervisors. And they're like, this guy's not going to be a problem, or like try to fight for a certain shot or not. I'm here to get a job done. And you tell me what it is and I'll do it. So that's I think what's helped me.
That makes a lot of sense. I really appreciate that. So in animation right now, animation, like it's been the Maya tool set for a while. Where's the opportunity in the future though? And
Unreal.
Yeah. I was just leading that direction. I just lost today is the last day
on the Discord.
Yeah. So John is leaving as the head of game arts, and now he's moving off over to Happy Mushroom, 100% virtual production.
Yeah.
So I've tried to get my head around this. How does animation and Unreal connect? Like, isn't it just still happening in Maya, or where's the opportunity there?
Yeah, it's an evolution. I mean, it's constantly changing, especially with Unreal 5 and the control rig that they're clearly trying to integrate. But yeah, there's still a toe, a big toe in Maya to get stuff in. But I'm super bullish on Unreal in that direction because of the level of iteration, especially talking about previs kind of stuff. Being able to show a client like a render from from Unreal versus, I mean, you're just going to this. When I say you, the studio is just going to win job. Whatever studio like starts to integrate that in their pipeline as, hey, here's the previs for this, and it looks, they're like going to confuse the client. Like, wait, this is previs. They're going to win the jobs, right? They're going to create great relationships with that client, and just they'll be like, yeah, I want to see more of this. So, yeah, I think if you're on board with that, and even if it's just especially with VR, like I was a lead on a VR project for Clash of Clans, and the only reason was because I'd done one other VR project and I became lead because so few people have experience doing VR and the kind of intricacies and like through that medium. And I think people, like, I looked down on games. I had someone emailing me who took one of my classes, and now he has his first job in the industry, and he's kind of like, it's a VR job. I'm kind of not stoked about it. I'm like, man, lean into it, because that could get you, like, ILM has their own VR department, right? And so they'll pull animators who, when they don't have films or something in between projects, they'll bring them into the VR department. But if you're, if you don't make the cut, you don't have that experience, maybe you'll get cut and not get transitioned over. So I think kind of back to that enthusiasm for having, exposure to all of these things, because it is, Unreal coming up, all these things, like it's such a dynamic, I mean, it's a tech kind of industry. Like, you have to stay on top of riding the wave. Otherwise you're going to get left behind. That's my idea.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I had an interview with Noah, who wrote the book on virtual production. He wrote a volume 1 and a volume 2 for Epic. And he was talking about that exact same thing, which is that the studio who integrates Unreal and who makes it so that their previs looks like their final product, like that studio, whoever does that, like, that's it. You got the jobs.
Yeah. And I think it's difficult when you think about these big studios that have invested millions in their pipelines, and it just doesn't really fit. And it's going to be a big investment to kind of, the bigger the studio, that's like the bigger the ship to turn the ship. It's going to take a minute. I think it's kind of the reason why I think Blender is not integrated in more ways than just modeling, because it's like all these tools and stuff aren't built for it. So it's going to take a while to turn the ship. But like I worked on Welcome to Morrowind, and that was a super novel way to use Unreal. And they were actually shortlisted for an Oscar, a visual effects Oscar for it, where they used the lighting from the mocap set in Unreal, or let me backwards. They lit it in Unreal so they could light the motion capture set, because they were what we did is kind of composite the eyes and the mouths from the motion capture takes onto the CG character. So the lighting needed to be the same. And so they had to light it first in Unreal so that they could in real life light it in the motion capture stage. So that then when we rendered it and composited it, it would all line up. And having that kind of novel take on stuff is going to just, it can't hurt anything. So yeah, I love to see that stuff applied in creative ways.
That's okay. So what was the name of that short?
Welcome to Morrowind. It was a Zemeckis movie. With Steve Carell.
Yes, I know which one you're talking about. Okay, so that was done with okay, fascinating.
Yeah, that was another thing. I actually built a tool to project, because in animation we didn't have projections of the plate on the character, and the proportions were different, right? They were toys, and their real live action mouth and eyes were going to go on to their face, and we had to manually keyframe lip sync on to match the live plates, but we couldn't get the plates were always over here, and we were having to animate over here. And knowing my kind of After Effects, I knew how to project stuff, and kind of back to the Ad Astra thing, I actually made this kind of tool where I could project the plate onto the model, just to be like, it didn't actually get through to the pipeline, but having that experience to be able to show, the pipeline guys like, hey, this is what I'm talking about. And kind of be in those conversations is helpful.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. And at Vertex here, like Unreal is, I mean, it's a big part of what we're doing, because the last 8 years, I'd say, was the digital sculpting revolution. That was a big impact. I saw a lot of my sculptor friends lose jobs. But the future, it's got to belong to Unreal.
Yeah, I think Unreal, and then there's a lot more physics-based, like simulation physics-based workflow being taught now in animation. So leveraging those kind of basic rigid body dynamics sims to add that overlapping action just to speed up the process. So I think it's going to be, because when you get into the games that have these real-time physics, it's going to be where these kind of, I think, methods converge from an animation standpoint. And then, when the stuff I see with AI, is pretty impressive. I think there's always going to be an animator, a human touch to be able to implement it, even if, let's say, 100 years down the road. There's still going to be someone that's going to have to press the button to be like, all right, this check box, everything works. So I'm not like super concerned as far as like job security or anything, but because the same argument had happened when it went from 2D to 3D, from 3D to using mocap, and now AI is getting involved and the physics-based stuff. You're still going to have to, because back to the entertainment thing, right? It's like all the physics can be right, but the next level is having the entertainment value, and it's always going to take a human touch to know, like, and having the kind of zeitgeist of the moment. Oh, I saw this meme like last week, and that touches on this kind of moment. Maybe I could add this kind of layer, kind of tongue in cheek into my animation that calls back to this thing that's very, hot topic right now. And yeah, I think there's always going to be human touch to it, but that stuff's super exciting.
Yeah. All right. So we're pretty close. I mean, actually, that went by super fast. So we've got some Q&A, a couple of questions that I need to get to. But on that AI kind of question, I think it's probably important also for people to remember, like, how much work goes into 3 seconds of animation.
Yeah.
Because I was asking Dan, I was like, hey, let's put together a short movie. And, I'm like, I'll come up with this and do this. And Dan's like, yeah, sure. How much money do you got? And I'm like, you got my money. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah. It's like, even if you know how to pull all the levers in animation, it's still going to take time, right? Like, that's when it's like, when I'm trying to schedule, when the producer on whatever project is like, what's the budget for this time budget? And it's like, it's no longer like a difficulty level. It's like, the difficulty is difficulty, whatever. We can do it. It's how long this going to take. It could be easy as pie, but it could still take super long. So animation takes a long time.
Yeah. It blew me away when so we had this thing for like a minute, and then slowly it's like, okay, well, it's 5 seconds. I can handle that.
And that's back to that thing about students going to those 20-second long shots. It's like, gotta rein it in.
Yeah. Achievable, right? Like, make sure, that everything's there. So I see Tron's got a couple questions. Sometimes. He's got a statement. So he's saying, sometimes as an animator, especially in games, what areas can you assist besides animation? And so he's saying, for instance, I found I was useful in UI animation. Didn't think of that before.
Yeah, for me, so I'm a cinematics animator, so I'm less of a tech side. But I think, just having familiarity with the pipeline, like, I'm able to kind of intelligently talk to the smarter guys than me and suggest tools and ways to speed things up, and understanding where the friction is and being involved in those conversations, and someone to go to. Like, for an example, I made a motion capture library of camera moves, and I can't name some of the studios that have bought it, but I've had like big name studios buy my little rinky dink, camera motion library. And that, just doing that on my own, has led me to have conversations at work because I'm like, hey, maybe we're using the same idle over and over. And just at home, I was able to do the XYZ because there's this new app that came out or whatever. And I'm a bit more on the cusp of things, because you have to remember too, at studios, they're always working on not the most recent version of any software, right?
Right.
It's got to be like super solid. And so they're not aware of the latest tools and stuff. So if you're following that stuff on Twitter or whatever, you could test that stuff out at home and see if it works on the version they're using, or at least be a part of the kind of future forward looking stuff at the studio you're at, to be involved in that and just be a part of that conversation about, hey, I'm going to be around long enough to see this implemented, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we got time for one more question. And what I'd love to know is just like, what is your advice for people who are looking at this today? You know, they could be, interested in Disney, they could be interested in, VFX, but they're looking at animation. What's your advice for them in terms of getting started and what they need to do to kind of prepare themselves, for the long haul, for the career, right?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think, educating yourself on it as much as possible. Like what I like to do is just go like watch a movie and look at the credits, and then go find those people on Twitter and follow them, because a lot of these artists will tell you in their tweets what their pain points are. And so questions you don't even know to ask, they're telling you straight up in their socials. And so that's the first kind of hack I would do, is like, I love this movie. Well, who was the supervisor on? Are they on Twitter? Oh, they are. Let me follow them. Who follows them? Who are their, and you can quickly build this web of like self-education and just creating this awareness of like, what am I getting myself into? Because I think that's something that's, difficult to clue in early on. Because the skills are the skills, but yeah, understanding what this entails for the long haul. Let me follow a guy that's been in it for 30 years and the guy who just started. What are they talking about? What's different about what they're talking about on social?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
All right, Lucas, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking the time, and I'm really excited to have you as a mentor in the program.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And so for everybody watching, make sure you guys upload your demo reels. Let me take a quick look and see how many more of those slots we've got available. I'm in the wrong place. Yes, I've still got 1 or 2 more slots, but you're going to have to upload those ASAP, which means that you need to register live for the festival, and it'll be in the product that you're assigned to. You'll get an email with the link. And if people want to learn more about you, Lucas, where do they go?
They can find me on social media, Twitter, Lucas Ridley. Yeah.
Awesome.